It should be on, Mark. I think it's on.
I think we're good. All right, guys, welcome to our masterclass, Pricing for Revenue Growth. Thanks for coming out. A couple of housekeeping items first. My name is Mark, I'm CMO Zen. We're going to do some housekeeping, get to the good stuff in just a couple of minutes. First, we wanted to thank Kiln. Everyone, please give Kiln a round of applause.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. This site has been open 4 months, so we're pretty new. This is the first kiln that we've built from ground up, which is exciting. And I think we're the only shared co-working space in the country built from ground up. So we were able to design it really well. We feel like the space looks great. The lighting's great. Yeah, we'd love to show you around after the event. If you're interested, we'd love to do a tour. But yeah, just welcome to the space. We're so happy to have you here, and thanks for supporting the event.
Thank you. A couple of other things. Shout out to Utah Tech Week. We love being a part of Utah Tech Week, and we were part of it last year. Excited to be a part of it this year. It's been awesome to be part of it. Another shout out, a group that we work with, Summit Venture Studios, puts on a great networking event, 11 a.m. on Tuesdays, called Midday Connect. You can see yours truly right here, of course. But they talk about lots of great topics, great networking opportunities. It's great. Okay, let me introduce Chad Jardine. Chad Jardine's the founder and CEO of CMO Zen, the finest fractional CMO firm in the land, specializing in helping founders and early marketing teams between like 1 and 15 to 20 million grow. Chad has over 20 years of CMO experience with a deep expertise in pricing strategy. We will turn the time over to Chad Jardine. Round of applause, please.
Thank you for the stellar intro, Mark. I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about pricing with you guys. I think this is, over the past 12 to 18 months especially, companies have been pushed to get to revenue generation faster, kind of backing off a little bit on the hyper growth as the be-all, end-all of entrepreneurship. And pricing is a great technique to crank up your revenue with zero additional CAC. Right? There's no additional customer acquisition cost. So let me jump in. Oh. So let me ask you first, of those of you, how many of you are running a startup right now or participating in a startup right now? Okay, wonderful. In terms of pricing, I want you to pay attention to this slide and see if I'm mentioning any of the ways that your pricing was set as you got started, right? This is a good way. Finger in the wind, right? Guessing is also good, right? Depending on how many people are in your company, sometimes this is a fierce negotiation in the C-suite. Oftentimes you have salespeople that are pitching for one thing, like, oh, I don't know, we could close more deals if we did this with our price. And the CEO's like, yeah, but we won't make any money. And everybody's trying to figure this out and land somewhere in the middle. Fear is always a big motivator. It's like, guys, if we change our price, everybody's going to churn. And trial and error, trial and error is a legit scientific method, right? But it'd be nice if we could do it with a little less, error. So in order to kind of nail this down, I'm going to encourage you to unlearn some of the things that you may have learned in the past about pricing. Also, is volume okay? Okay, I'm like looking at my range here. Okay, a couple of stats to kind of prime the conversation here. 40% of seed stage companies have never tested pricing or conducted any form of willingness to pay research. 55% of them handle pricing ad hoc, right? Oftentimes that's just, let's do this, boom. And the first test really for pricing is we pick a price and we run it up and see if people buy. 82% of seed stage pricing falls to the CEO. So one of the things here is this is a more formal approach to pricing is actually kind of a mark of maturity. As companies grow, their pricing strategy becomes more mature and you have less of this kind of the CEOs just winging it. Not that the CEOs is a bad choice for setting pricing, but it is a lot of weight to put on them. And then half of seed stage companies really only consider pricing right before launch. Okay, now this is, I've got your attention now, right? The ugly cat, you can't look away. There are two stories that I like to tell. This is part of why pricing is confusing. One of those is, so there was this story about ugly cats in Denver. This was back when people advertised in the newspaper. Lady had a litter of cats. She's trying to sell them, right? She's trying to get rid of them. Nobody is coming. Finally, she posts an ad, ugly cats free. And all the cats are gone in a weekend. Another story related to that is from Robert Cialdini's Influence. He tells a story about a turquoise jeweler. And they had this tray of jewelry that just wasn't moving. They couldn't sell it for anything. And so the owner goes on vacation, leaves a note behind that says, cut everything in half price-wise, and we'll see if we can get some of this to move. While she's on vacation, her admin looks at this and misunderstands it and instead doubles the price of everything, and it sells out. Stories like these make it feel like, what the heck? How can you possibly know? Like, these are so counterintuitive. How can you get to the bottom of it? And more importantly, like, pricing has a big impact, right? You get this wrong, and it really fouls things up. So here this shows, like, if you have a 5% improvement in these categories here. Let me see can we see that? Not really. Okay. So if you look at 5% improvement in your price, 5% improvement in revenues, lowering your COGS by 5%, lowering your SG&A by 5%, or lowering your R&D cost by 5%, which is going to have the biggest impact in your revenue, in your EBIT. And price is way out front. You think about that a little bit, and it makes sense, but it's not maybe not the leading thing in our conversations with our CFOs, right? So one of the things that I put together is I combined 10 principles on pricing into a canvas. And there will be this as well as all the materials. There's an ebook. All this stuff is available for free for you to download after the event. I'll send you the link, and I'll show you the link in the last slide. And this is a way for me to make sense of, okay, if I have a pricing conversation, I want a quick way to go through all of the considerations that I should make as I'm looking at pricing. And I'm not going to cover all 10 today, right? But I am going to cover these 3. Right? So we'll talk about pricing methods, pricing structure, some of the psychology of pricing, and then how to execute price changes. Okay? All right. So this is now about 15 years old, but Warren Buffett famously said in his evaluation of companies and making investments that the single most important decision in evaluating the business is its pricing power. What's pricing power? Well, Warren went on to explain in a shareholders call that what he's talking about is, does this company have the ability to raise their price and not lose customers? Or every time they think about, like a 10% increase in pricing, they have to, circle the wagons and have a prayer meeting. If that's the case, I'm worried. Now, I'm going to tell you, right, like, Warren's totally wrong. He's totally out to lunch on this. And it's kind of, and you're like, well, Chad, Warren's pretty famous. Like, this is the Oracle of Omaha. You seriously going to, counter Warren Buffett? But how many times can you have that pricing power? Once you spend it, it's spent, right? That's not the type of pricing power that you can retain. Let me come at this from another angle. So some of you guys like Neil Patel. He's got a great little marketing podcast, doing a lot of fun things. As we were heading into 2022, he's like, look, whatever you do, don't increase your prices unless you have to during volatile times. Neil, you're wrong. That what you're doing is, this is a proxy for not knowing. It's a proxy for not knowing any better. And you're like, Chad, Neil's also famous and you're not, so are you sure we don't? Well, use your own judgment, but the case that I'm going to make is that both of these are essentially excuses for not understanding willingness to pay. What you really want to do is know, what is somebody willing to pay? And where is what you're charging falling in that spectrum? I was a little ahead of myself there. And the big question is like, okay, am I pricing too high? Or am I pricing too low in relationship to my willingness to pay? Either way, I'm leaving money on the table, right? If I'm pricing too high, then customers that otherwise would buy aren't coming through. If I'm pricing too low, then a good example is, let's say the willingness to pay for your product is $10, and you charge $5. There is 0 additional customer satisfaction delivered for charging $5. The customer is happy to pay 10. They would be delighted, ecstatic to get the value your product provides at 10, because that's their willingness to pay. The only thing that's happening there is that you're leaving money on the table. So, okay, let's jump in. First thing I talked about was the pricing method. This is Kyle Poyar. He's like the pricing guy at OpenView. Now, OpenView just kind of closed this last, I guess, a month or so ago. So I'm not sure what he's doing. He's still putting out a lot of great pricing content, though, so he's a good one to follow. He's like, why aren't we talking about, so back here, there's really 2 methods, right? Cost-based and value-based. Cost-based, you'll notice asset, market, and income. If any accounting heads in here will recognize those as these are business valuation approaches, right? And they also are pricing approaches, because pricing is essentially a valuation exercise on your product. Value-based is kind of its own thing. So he's like, why aren't you doing value-based pricing? And in this survey, what they found is that only a little less than 40%, and he's focused primarily on B2B SaaS companies, and only a little less than 40% were doing value-based pricing. Otherwise, best judgment, we kind of talked about those as different ways that you approach pricing. Competitor-based, that's actually the market-based approach, right? We're looking around and seeing what other people are charging, and that's giving us a signal at what we're willing to pay. Or cost plus, which that's the asset base. Sorry. So why aren't we doing value-based? In fact, what the heck is value-based pricing? So how many people here are wearing red pumps? We're skewing a little male in this audience, so I think that cuts down a bunch of us.
I left him at home.
It's like, man, I was counting on you today. Like, you let me down here. So the reason I picked this is because I thought it was unlikely that very many people would be. But willingness to pay, this is the key to value-based pricing. It's about understanding someone else, being in someone else's shoes, not trying to force them to walk in ours. So this is a customer research problem. It's understanding that somebody else isn't going to, they call that me marketing, right? Oh, I'm going to pretend that all the customers look and act and think and feel like me, and I'm going to make my decisions based on that. And a little bit of research dispels that in a hurry. So speaking of research, right, no presentation would be complete without a solid Dilbert. The second option feels right. Let's go with that. Well, should we always ignore what the data says, or is this more of a one-time thing? It's called intuition. Slippery slope to witchcraft. Okay, so speaking of witchcraft, let's talk about a little pricing voodoo here. And this is an approach to the value of understanding willingness to pay. Okay, for lunch, pizza and salad. But you didn't realize that this was an object lesson, or maybe you picked up on that when I sent you the survey, but let's talk about pizza and salad. In this object lesson, let's imagine that you own a restaurant and you sell really nice pizzas and also gourmet salads. And you've identified that there are 4 segments that have different willingness to pay for the different products that you're selling. Okay, this is breaking like a presentation rule. I'm going to put numbers on the screen. I'll do the math for you, so you don't have to do the math in your head. But in this case, we've got A, B, C, and D represent the segments. Each has 100 people that responded to our survey. Then we take a look at their willingness to pay for pizza and their willingness to pay for salad. It looks like some people are really excited about pizza and some people are really excited about salad, and some people are kind of in the middle. So if we look at that, let's say that we set our individual price for pizza or salad at the lowest price. If we set that the lowest price, then we're going to charge $2.50 for pizza and we're going to charge $1.50 for salad. So out of these 400 people, let's say that this is a monthly consumption. Out of these 400 people, we add that up, and we're going to make $1,600 a month if we price this way against this set of segments and willingness to pay. So what if it's like, well, we can still get most of the customers if we go up to the next level, right? Like we're going to lose the 100 that only are willing to pay the least, but we'll still get, 3/4 of them. If we increase our price to the second lowest, right, at $4.50 and $5, now we've gone from $1,600 to $2,850 and changed nothing except our price. We didn't change the product. We didn't add new features, right? Our cost to deliver the product's exactly the same. We're actually selling a little bit less of it. And we're making, almost $1,000 more, or $1,200 more. Let's keep going. What if we take it up to the third lowest price, or the second highest price? Now we're up from, so we started at $1,600, now we're up to $3,300. Still, no new features, same customers, right? We didn't have to spend more marketing to get them in the door. All we did was change our pricing structure to match willingness to pay, and we went from $1,600 to $3,300 a month. What if we go even to the highest? Well, now something's different. Okay, so at the highest, the number of customers that we lose is not made up for by the increase in price. So of the 4 options, right, if we're going to price individually, the 4 options, we should go with number 3, right? That's going to give us the most revenue per month. Do we think that we've extracted all the money out of this audience that we can? Well, let's take a look at another thing. What if we bundled our products? So even people who had a low willingness to pay for salad, they still were willing to pay a little. Maybe we could bundle these and get a larger overall price. Let's see what that looks like. So we're going to shift our pricing schedule to only selling bundles. So you can't buy pizza on its own or salad on its own anymore. You can only buy them together. And we'll add these up, right? So we're taking the pizza column and the salad column and adding those up. And it looks like if we charge $10.50, we can get everybody. All 400 people would be willing to pay that for both. So what is that? Hey, we went from $3,300 to $4,200 just by switching from individual pricing to bundled. That's pretty cool. Like we've gone from $1,600 up to $4,200. Still exactly the same number of customers, exactly the same product. Right? So in this case, bundling got us an extra 27%. What else could you do that would generate 27% increased revenue, right, without spending any money? Right? Have we maxed out yet? Right? That's like kind of inferred in the question, right? I have more magic to share. What about mixed bundling? What if instead of selling individually or as a combo, we sold some combos and some individuals based on where the maximum willingness to pay was? So in this case, we're going to sell pizza at $9 and we're going to sell salad at $9 if you buy it alone, or we'll sell the bundle for $13. So we're getting the high side of either individual or bundled pricing. Now our revenue's up to $4,400. So if you think about the delta between where we started at $1,600 and $4,400, and these slides will be available for you afterwards too. So if you're interested, you can come decompile these. But we were able to get 175% more revenue out of exactly the same product, exactly the same audience, same marketing spend, right? Same cost of goods by adjusting our pricing. So are you starting to get convinced that there's some power in understanding willingness to pay? Oh, sorry, this was our survey. So this is the pizza and salad willingness to pay for this event. So for those of you who answered the survey, thank you. I took your data and plugged it in, and this is what we were showing. So we looked at willingness to pay for pizza, willingness to pay for salad, willingness to pay for the bundle. We don't have a huge sample size here. 9 people responded for each. But even in a small group like this, we were able to demonstrate 27% more revenue or more willingness to pay just from you all. Right? So pretty cool, and also doesn't take that long to do this kind of analysis. You can knock this out pretty quick. So this is Madhavan Ramanujam is the author of Monetizing Innovation, and he's one of the sort of OGs in tech pricing. probably one of the highlights of my professional career was that he accepted my LinkedIn connection request. So anyway, he's really sharp. And this is why he's saying this, that sometimes how you charge is often more important than what you charge. Okay, a couple of notes on bundling, because now I may have convinced you that bundling is the way to go no matter what. So let's talk about that for a quick sec. Don't bundle inexpensive and expensive items together because people average the value. So for instance, don't sell a diamond necklace with a free sandwich because people average the value and that will drag down your expensive item. Also, this is called the leader, filler, and killer framework. If you're looking at how to rank willing to pay across different features of your product, this is a great one. So in this case, we're going to use the example of like a meal deal at McDonald's, right? We got a burger, fries, and coffee. So the leader feature is the thing that people are coming to your restaurant to pay for. The burger is the leader feature in the meal deal. Fries are the filler feature. So it's less common that people go just to buy fries on their own, but they'll buy fries with the burger. So their willingness to pay goes up for the bundle, but they're not willing to pay if you only lead with fries, right? And then when they did this study, coffee was a killer feature here. So you notice that most meal deals aren't this, right? If you go for lunch, you get a soft drink, not coffee. Sometimes you'll see coffee bundled with breakfast. And what they found is that some people don't drink coffee, some people don't like coffee, some people don't like coffee in the afternoon. And so if you forced them to buy coffee with the meal deal, you got it became a killer. People would not buy it all if you included it. So let's take a look at what this looks like for a SaaS product. Let's say I have a bunch of generic features over here, and I have 3 packages, a good, a better, and a best. In this case, the feature that is a leader for better becomes a killer for good. Make sense? So let's say, I'll try to come up with a good example. Let's say I sell software, and so I used to do the marketing for a software company called GoReact. We had an ed tech product. Let's say that, and we bundled with Instructure, right, with Canvas. So let's say that we were selling to a customer that didn't use Canvas. They used a different LMS. For them, Canvas integration would be a killer feature. But for somebody who uses Canvas, it may be a leader feature. They are definitely willing to pay for that. Making sense? Any questions on that so far? Okay. All right. Tariff structure. So I'm not talking about international trade. In this case, each of these structures is called either a linear pricing model, a 2-part, or a 3-part tariff, because there's a forcing function to pay for a certain thing. I'll explain. So linear pricing is you get one more and you pay one more unit. So this is the purest form of usage-based pricing. You know, I use so many API calls, I pay for so many API calls. 2 apples, $2, 3 apples, $3 is exactly linear. So where do we see this kind of pricing? Gas pump, right? So I can pay for different types of gasoline, but it's always this exact same price per gallon. If I buy 10 gallons, it's 10 gallons times the price, right? Okay, now linear is really easy to understand. Let's take a look at some of the tariff examples. This is a 2-part tariff. So now, let's say that before you can buy any apples from me, you need to buy a bushel. And the bushel is $5, and then you can buy apples. So now I have established a pricing minimum. And sometimes that's the reason you'd use a tariff like this, is because you want people, it may not be worth it for you to deliver apples one at a time. You may need a minimum price to make that make sense. So who does this? Costco and Amazon, where you have a membership fee. The membership fee is the bushel. So if I want to do Amazon Prime, I pay my Prime membership, and then I get all of the benefits of Prime. And I pay for my goods one at a time after that. At Costco, same thing, right? I pay my membership fee, and then I pay for tires one set at a time. Right? So it gets a little bit more complex. Why is the complexity worth it? Well, I think I've got this on the slide in a sec, but the 3-part tariff has actually been shown to be the highest revenue-generating pricing approach for SaaS companies. So here I get a bushel, and it's full of apples, and then beyond that I pay for each apple separately. So who prices like this? Oh, there we go. Yeah, highest revenue generation structure for SaaS. Here's one example, right? A lot of software companies are priced like this. So with HubSpot, oh, I forget the pointer doesn't work. So I get, do you see where it says includes 5 paid users? Those are my apples. So I have a minimum price, includes a certain number of users. And then beyond that, 90 month per user additional. It's just like users are just apples. Okay, thank you for showing me all these pricing structures. How do I figure out which ones are right for me? Let's take a look. So there's a handful, of willingness to pay research methods. And I'm going to talk specifically about the Van Westendorp method because it's something that you could deploy super quick and easy, especially with some of the downloadable resources that I've provided for you. So there's Madhavan, also Patrick Campbell. These guys are really great at pricing, and this is where I learned about the Van Westendorp price sensitivity model, is from their work. Okay, so Van Westendorp was, let me back up just a second. Van Westendorp was like some Dutch guy. Even among, like at Simon Kucher, sometimes they call this the Voldemort approach because nobody can say Van Westendorp. And the real question was, okay, I want to poll customers about what their willingness to pay is. Why don't I just ask them? If I ask them just straightforwardly, one of the difficult things is that a lot of customers don't know. Like, if somebody was to ask me, how much are you willing to pay for a sandwich? It's like, well, I don't know. What kind of sandwich is it, And if I tell you, it's like, wait a minute, you're asking me because you're going to price the sandwich, right? So I don't want to go high. And they're right? If they tell us they're willing to pay a lot, we are going to increase the price. So people have an incentive to not be clear about this. So what's great about Van Westendorp is it asks a series of 4 questions that help people triangulate what they're actually willing to pay by giving them comparisons. So these are the 4 questions. What price is way too expensive? You would never consider buying at this price. What price is getting, you guys are familiar with this if you took the survey, right? What price is getting expensive, but you would still consider it? What price is a great deal? You would pay this right away. This is the zero friction price for you. And what price is too cheap? You would start to doubt the quality of what you were getting. Now, I have a lot of surveys that I've done where people are like, no price is too cheap. I always take this for free. But when you get into it, most of the time there is a price where people start to raise an eyebrow. Okay, and then when you do the survey, the results are plotted in a chart that looks like this. So the expensive and too expensive are inverted, and too cheap and great deal are linear. And what this shows us is that there's this zone. This is the willingness to pay zone. Now, is this exactly precisely what everybody's willing to pay? No. But is it a data-informed approach of seeing what the zone of willingness to pay is? Yes. And it's something that you can get quick and easy. I mean, I think I sent the last round of surveys out on Monday. Today's Wednesday. That was enough time for me to take and analyze the data of this survey. This is the zone. Okay, let me show you some of these that I've done for clients. First thing I want you to show you is that the willingness to pay, like the price ranges, they're all over the place, right? 40 to 70 bucks, 1,500 to 2,200 bucks, 50 to 100 bucks, and then a few $100s. Now, what do we see in these? So sometimes you see, I keep wanting to point, sometimes this diamond shape is really nice and crisp, and then there's also weird things like these cliffs right here. Well, what does that mean, right? Here, this one had a bunch of these, boom, boom, boom. So let me give you some examples. Also, sometimes you get one that looks like this. What the heck is going on? In this case, we surveyed people and actually asked them for a monthly price that they were willing to pay. Some people responded with the annual price. So the outliers gave us these really weird things. So we just had to lop those off, and then our chart started to look more normal. So this was the very first Van Westendorp that I ever ran. And we had a couple hundred respondents. A lot of times people ask you, like, okay, how many respondents is statistically significant? Well, usually sort of north of a couple hundred, but that's not really what we're going for. We're not trying to nail this down precisely. I mean, unless you're talking about launching a product where this is going to be millions of dollars in the launch, you have a ton of this riding on this, then you want to do a lot of these surveys and get a lot of responses. But for most of us, right, we're in younger companies and we just need some data. It's like, if I have 100 responses, 50 responses, and they're pretty consistent, the consistency is really the key. If they're all over the place, then you probably can't trust that. But if they're consistent across 10, 20, 50 responses, that's pretty trustworthy. So in this case, this is what we were charging. We were charging $19. This is an EdTech product, so this was per user per semester. 19 bucks. And then we had these weird cliffs over here. What is that telling me? Well, what it's telling me is that inside the population that I surveyed, there are clusters of people with different willingnesses to pay. So what kind of decisions does that present to me? Maybe what that means is that I need pricing tiers. I need product tiers that match those. We only had one. One product, you got everything you got for 19 bucks. But this indicated that the customer base, there were people in there willing to pay up as high as almost 40 bucks. So the spreadsheet that I give you, it will also have both a frequency and a revenue kind of maximization test in there. Because sometimes you'll get one that says, oh, I'm willing to pay, and it's like 5 times as much as the mean of whoever's left. And so it seems like that's a really good price point because it covers so much churn could be absorbed in that. This helps check for that. So in this case, at $29, we were too expensive for 8%. So you can see that as the price goes up, then this is the percentage who are no longer willing to pay. So at $29, we remember where we were? We were at 19. So at $29, we only lost 8%. That's not bad. So at $30, we hit this right here, the jump from 29 to 30 was a cliff for us. So we became too expensive for 30% as opposed to 8. Are you following that okay? I know it's a lot of numbers. Likewise, we take a look and we wanted to see where's that crossover. So let's say that I am going to increase my price by 20%. How many customers does that cover? It means for every 5 customers I keep, I could lose one in my current cohort and break even. It'd be the same. 20% times 5 gets me to 100%, right? One whole customer. So we want to know where that sweet spot is. And in this case, right at the same $29, that was our profit maximizing price. Okay, this is all baked into the spreadsheet. I'm going to go ahead and skip through this. This is an example we did for RevRoad. So Cameron was good enough, and this was a really easy survey to conduct, right? Amy Caldwell drops it on LinkedIn. Within a week or two, you have enough survey respondents to do this analysis. Pretty cool. And this product, we're looking at a monthly price, and you can see what are we looking at in terms of the zone of willingness to pay. Probably a little over $5 on the bottom, and not quite $11 on the top. So somewhere between $5 and $10 was the monthly willingness to pay. So because I had this analysis is really easy to run once you have all the formulas built in, I was like, well, looking at the data, there's kind of a lot of disparity. I had other demographic data in there. So I wanted to ask, okay, does this matter if they're married or single? Does it matter if they have children or not? Does it matter if they're, what age they are? And so I took it and I ran the exact same data. So this is the exact same survey, but I ran it by age band. And you can see here, these are pretty small ticket items, but the age band for people younger than 30, $4.50 to $10. 30 to 40, $6 to $11, pretty much the same. 40 to 50, $5 to $15. Now hang on, the low end is pretty much the same here, but the high end, that's 50% more. That's pretty significant. Over 50, back to $5.50 to $12. So over 50, there's still a little bit more willingness to pay, but the sweet spot here, this is a significant difference. So if I was going to retool that, I might target my marketing towards customers that were in that band. This is the chart for our lunch today. So I've dropped in their willingness to pay. Looks like people are mostly willing to pay between $5 and $7 for lunch. So hopefully this worked out to be a net positive ROI for you to come here and get lunch for free, right? But again, just showing that these analyses are quick and easy to run. And so there's no reason to go forth and not have this data, kind of ready, quick to hand. Okay. I want to talk about pricing psychology. Anybody mystified? Same thing, right? The ugly cats, the turquoise. Like, people are weird. Human beings do weird things. We don't act the way that we're expected to act. And so I did a quick rundown. Well, let's see. First, I got to introduce you to this guy. So if you ever want a fun time about diving into pricing psychology, go to nickkalenda.com. Nick Kalenda, I think, is one of the strongest at this. He just loves diving into all these research studies that I use in case of insomnia, right? But he distills them onto his website. Really great, much deeper dive than I'm going to go into today. So that's a referral for you. Okay, I took a look at psychological effects and cognitive biases, and I made a list. The list is almost 200 long in terms of all of these, bystander effect, right? The halo effect, all of these different psychological effects and biases. I was like, okay, which of those really relate to pricing and the decision about how they impact our willingness to pay? And in order to make sense of those, I lumped those into these 4 buckets. And so I'm going to give you some examples in these 4 buckets that helps take that list of 200 and it's like, okay, mostly we're thinking about these themes. And we'll talk about them. And it's, people really are weird. Okay, so first, this is the idea of what you encounter first or you recall first has an outsized impact on your decisions. So an example of this could be the primacy bias. The first thing that I see is the thing that I'll remember most. A great example of this is anchoring, the anchoring principle in negotiation, which is that the first price that gets thrown out, like you ever been in a negotiation, everybody's like afraid to throw out the first price? How come? Well, it's because when they throw that price out, that everything that happens in the conversation after that will be relative to that price. That will be the first, it occupies the first real estate in everybody's mind. So again, to Robert Cialdini, how many of you guys have read Influence? Robert Cialdini's Influence? Okay. This is a story that he tells. He tells about 2 tailors, the Drubek brothers. And they're in New York, and they're fitting a customer. One of them's out front fitting a customer for a suit. And finally the customer's like, okay, this is fantastic. This looks great. How much for the suit? And I think their names were Harry and Stan. So Harry calls back to Stan and says, Stan, how much for this suit? And Stan's like, for that 100% premium wool suit, like $45. And like, you can tell the story's kind of old, right? Where the only place you can get a suit for $45 is like nowhere, I guess. And to that, did I say Harry or Stan was out? Whoever's out front, they're like, they pretend like they're a little hard of hearing. It's like, what was that? Yeah, okay. So he says this suit, $25. And because the brother actually threw out $45, the customer heard it, and they're like, oh, sweet. All along they intended to sell it for $25. But the anchoring principle made it to where the customer left feeling like they got a great deal. When I did the marketing for, if any of you guys are old enough to remember the Roberts Arts and Crafts stores that were attached to Provo Craft, I did the marketing for them for a little while. What does every craft store have? Crafts? That's good. And a 40% off coupon. Everybody has a 40% off coupon. It's like you realize that everything in the store gets marked up by 40% to make that coupon work, right? It's like, well, yeah, but we feel really good about it. And the craft store, they can't get away from it. Like everybody tries, like, let's do the Walmart example and introduce, everyday low pricing. And then they just lose share. It's like, well, my 40% off coupon doesn't work? Like, you guys are rascals, right? And it's about the anchoring effect. Some other things that is the recency bias, if you are familiar with that, which is that the most recent thing that you've seen, or the most frequent, there's a frequency bias too, the most thing you've seen the most frequently, that those things you'll give the outsized impact to in terms of remembering. So when you look at, okay, which one am I going to buy? It's the one that you remember first. All right, the other one is friends. This is where we talk about social proof, FOMO, things like this. What we find is that the biases that are attached to this there's a community bias or the community effect, which means that we look at people and if we identify that we're part of the same group, we trust them more. We think that their opinion is more worthwhile. It's a really disingenuous bias, but think about it, right? Let's say you root for BYU. We're in Provo, right? Let's say you root for BYU. You see somebody that's got a BYU shirt on, you're like, those are my people. That's, I can trust what they're going to do. My wife was telling me about this as we were driving down. She's like, when I was in my early 20s, I bought one of the new Beetles. And I thought it was the coolest car ever. It was so great. And I pulled up to a stop sign and I looked and somebody else was driving a Beetle. And I'm like, look, yeah. And they're like, she's crazy over there. But she's like, no, that's my people. That's my people. People that are like us. So sports teams is an easy one, but also you see somebody that trusts similar brands or that are like us in other ways. Our demographics, things like that. Okay. The third one is reactions. So I'll explain this way. There are things that we react to that we have no choice about, right? So for example, if I come and I go, bang! Stop and feel what's happening in your body. You did not choose to release adrenaline and cortisol. You did not choose to elevate your heart rate. None of those things did you do intentionally, but they happened. So there's a lot of marketing tools that apply to what do we just intuitively feel. There's studies that show that our responses to design happen in a 20th of a second. Do we feel like something is trustworthy and professional? It happens in a 20th of a second. So think about that. And remember how you're feeling, right? Because I don't think there's any better way to communicate that. A bunch of these are listed too in the ebook. So you can take a deeper dive than we'll do today. There's also references. So what these are is essentially coded signals that activate parts of your brain. So references may be things like the perception of weight. So they did a study with packaging for cookie boxes. And what they found is that if the images of cookies they placed on the box were placed higher in the design, that they had the perception of being less heavy. They were lighter. And that people intuitively connected that. It's like, oh, if I eat these cookies, I will be lighter. And it's a real thing. And it happens unconsciously. Another thing can be proximity, how close something is to something else. For example, if you ever notice that the call to action or the checkout page has things like testimonials near the call to action, or it used to be that people used a lot of McAfee antivirus and put those little symbols. Now everybody's got that, so it's kind of a moot point. But if you put it close to the call to action, people infer the difference. So when you have authority, when you have testimonials, when you have social proof, placing that close to the call to action makes people think it relates to the call to action. In other words, somebody could be giving a testimony, this product was great for me and did yada, yada, yada. That's nothing about how great your demo is going to be if you click the, get a demo. But your brain will make that association. Another thing is that Nick Lund actually has a good piece about this where he's like, if we show people things, we can prime them. You can prime their brain in the sequence. Like think about your UX decisions. You can prime people to be thinking about things that are favorable to your checkout process, to your pricing. Like they did a study where they showed an apple. And that apple activates the part of your brain that is attached to other things related to apple. Maybe red, maybe fruit, maybe Apple computers. And what does that mean in terms of design? Are you a fan, right? This is kind of back to the FOMO thing. It's like, look, I have an iPhone. Like this other guy has an iPhone. Look, I may not vote the same as that guy, but he's got to be good somewhere, right? Because I'm attaching that community effect. The other thing that references, that activation effect is powerful. Another thing that goes along with this is storytelling. So if you think about a narrative arc, what happens in your brain when you hear a story, and the thing is, we are all 100% addicted to stories. We love them. We go to movies, we talk to each other and tell stories, we read books, and the more that things follow a story arc, that narrative is compelling to us. How come? Well, they've done some studies that show that the narrative arc is really simple. There's more complex ways of looking at this, but if you think about it, there's a protagonist, and the protagonist has an obstacle. There is a challenge that is making things difficult for the protagonist. Ultimately, the protagonist overcomes the obstacle. What happens when we hear this is, as we listen to the story, we empathize with the protagonist. When the protagonist faces their obstacle, our brains release cortisol. We get stressed, we get anxious. How are they gonna escape? How are they gonna get out of this? No, don't go down those dark stairs. We feel that. And then when they overcome the obstacle, our brains release oxytocin, right? The feel-good hormone. This is just like the adrenaline that you felt. Like, we can't control this. It is part of how we're built. So when you think about what that means, you can take somebody on a journey, and essentially it's just like Inception, right? You're putting something in their head. And they may not believe exactly, but they will feel it. They'll have to reckon with the thoughts of what happened to that protagonist. So now think about that when you're doing your case studies. So I have a case study which is providing social proof that helps me be encouraged to complete this purchase. If in that case study, the protagonist encounters an obstacle, my day was fine, and then I had hit this problem, which just happens to be the problem that our product solves, and my life, all of a sudden was thrown into chaos, and then you came and rescued the day with your product. I go through that narrative arc, and you're implanting in the customer's brain that your product will deliver them the same results as it did to this protagonist in the case study. So, okay, feeling sufficiently psychologically. Let's talk about price changes. Price changes are probably one of the scariest pricing decisions that you face. So here's Kyle again. Many SaaS companies put a 5 to 7% annual price escalator in their contracts. The big ones, right? Salesforce does this. So if you wait 3 years with no price increase, you could be 20% or more behind all of your competitors who have the price escalation built in. Just think about that. That's a lot, right? And it happened without you doing a thing. 98% of the time, price changes had either a neutral or positive impact on the revenue growth of the business. So what this is saying is sometimes you can make a price change. And these are not just price changes. These are price increases. Nobody cares about a price decrease. I can increase my price most of the time. It's not going to have a dramatic detrimental effect. It's not that it never happens, but most of what you're afraid will happen won't. And in 2 out of 5 cases, right, so that's 40% of the time, pricing changes led to a 25% or greater improvement in ARR. That's a lot. This is Naomi Ionita. She's with Menlo Ventures and a great resource on pricing. She says you should be losing 20 to 30% of your deals due to pricing. How many of you have that attitude? Not me. I'm not pricing to lose that many deals. But what she's saying, and I don't know that this is the gospel truth, that 20 to 30% is magic, but just the thought exercise I think is really valuable. It's like, well, how many deals am I losing to pricing? If I'm losing 0, probably I'm priced too low. Okay, these are my 7 price change commandments. Be direct, specific, and clear. Don't make it ambiguous as you're communicating about price changes. Everybody needs to know what is going to happen, and it needs to be concrete and clear. Don't over-communicate. Sometimes we feel like, oh, this is going to be a hard thing for them to swallow, and so we're going to send them like 17 emails about it, and we're going to just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And that nervous energy doesn't help the price change go down. Don't use euphemisms. So there's some classic examples with Microsoft, YouTube, and Netflix where they're like, this is really, a value enhancement, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, people are not idiots. I mean, people individually do a lot of dumb stuff, but people collectively are actually really smart. And so they see through that kind of stuff. Don't apologize. This can be hard, right? Like I consider myself kind of a nice person, like generally, like outside of work and this kind of stuff. So when something happens, like I feel personally invested in my client's satisfaction. But apologizing actually undermines what this signals to the customer is that you made this arbitrary choice, that there was no thought behind it, that this wasn't a clear business goal, that you didn't have obligations to other stakeholders and to your employees and whatnot. And so apologizing, this is the wrong time for that. It is okay to include rationale. Include some reason for the price change. Rationale actually diffuses a lot of customer service issues. If people have a reason, it doesn't even have to be a good reason. Just having a reason helps us say, okay, now I'm shifting from an emotional basis to an intellectual basis for reckoning with this decision. Reinforce the value if you can. Say, hey, look, we're going to raise prices, but we're also going to increase value in these ways. Like if you have a big product release and you have a price change, time them to happen together. And then offer customers a way to communicate and voice questions and concerns. I touched on a couple of these, but here's my 3 tips for executing price changes. So 7 commandments for communicating about them, 3 tips for executing. do add value. Bring something else. Sometimes this means it's like, okay, we're going to grandfather you in at the old price, or we're going to give you the value of an increased price tier for a period of time. We're going to show you that we know that this matters to you and that your dollars are valuable, and so we're going to make sure we earn them. Earning somebody's money is not the same as saying, I'm sorry that I'm taking your money, right? Consider the time, like, this is not just timing it with product releases, but also what's happening in the world. Are you being tone deaf to world events? What's happening in your customer base? There could be things that are rippling through your customer base. It could be announcement about tech changes. It could be all kinds of things. Be sensitive to timing. And then the last one is consider grandfathering. So grandfathering is where you leave old customers at the old price. If you're a mature company, grandfathering a lot of times doesn't make sense, right? Like when Netflix goes and raises their price, it doesn't make sense for them to grandfather everybody at the old price because that's everybody. But if you're a young and growing company, grandfathering ultimately, like let's say the number of customers that are grandfathered versus the new ones you're capturing as you grow, the new ones is where all of your revenue really is. So it costs you very little to grandfather the old customers, or even if you grandfather them for a period of time, right? A couple of billing cycles or something like that. Grandfathering does feel good to the old customers, and in a high growth situation, costs you almost nothing. This is an example of a price change email that touches on all of these things. So this is SparkToro. Are you guys familiar with that product, SparkToro? You probably saw Amanda's email 2 weeks ago, but just in case, SparkToro's prices are going up on February 8th. This is clear. He's following the commandments of pricing communication. You can still get our existing prices for another 2 weeks. If you do, for as long as you maintain your subscription, you'll remain at the current rates. Grandfathering, right? Grandfathering and increasing value. When prices go up and the new tiers have more features, you'll get those too. Another opportunity to add value. Also, in my opinion, January is a smart time to start tracking your audiences, reinforcing the value of why you bought this in the first place. Right? This is really good, and not long, not lengthy. How often? Did you guys have any guesses? How often you should revisit pricing? Yeah, I think it actually is probably different for different industries and different customer types, but the rules that I like to use are these. If something is changing in the product or the customer, it's a good opportunity to reevaluate. Now, if this is happening like on a weekly basis, that's probably too soon. But changes to the product and the customer are where the willingness to pay is going to change. And so that's an opportunity to revisit. So ultimately, if you think about Bruce Lee's Be Water, it's about filling the cup. The cup is willingness to pay. You want to absorb everything that the customer is willing to pay. Then you'll be confident that you're maximizing your pricing, and that you're not leaving money on the table. For the slides and resources, this is the URL. If there's one slide you want to snap, it's probably this one. So it's cmozen.com, UTW for Utah Tech Week -pricing-2024. And if you go there, you can access things. You can access these slides. You can access the recording that we're doing, as well as the files for all the resources that I talked about today. And if you'd like to talk to me about anything, you can get on my calendar at chadscalendar.com. All right, that's the end of my prepared remarks. Let's ask questions. Yes?
So I've spent most of my career in selling to higher education, so this is a little bit specific to at least B2B SaaS. I'm curious if you're aware of research that supports my general theory, which is your impact on churn is greater when you underprice than when you overprice.
If I understand right, what you're saying is that underpricing actually leads to more churn.
Correct.
Like they haven't made as big of a commitment, and
That's
so.
Exactly right. Yeah.
I am not aware of specific research about that, but I think the rationale makes sense. I think pricing in higher ed tends to be pretty sticky if you're creating value.
It is, and it's why pricing consistency is critically important, because most of that pricing, because they're public institutions, is available and
Yeah.
they speak to one another. So there's a whole nother level of that we found. If you sell into individual departments or sellers that don't feel the pain as great as others. They're willing to pay less, and they're willing to. It's more likely that they churn. So that 20 to 30% of clients, prospects that you walk away from,
Yeah.
rather than underpricing, I really do value that. It's
I think,
very pronounced in my business.
yeah, I think there's a confirmation bias at work, which is essentially is when people make a decision to purchase, they look for evidence that they were smart about their purchase decision. And so the higher the commitment is, the more that confirmation bias kicks in. I'll tell you another little, this is kind of unrelated to pricing, but so if you answer RFPs to public, like because you mentioned this about how data is public, if you answer an RFP to a public institution, you can request that your response to the RFP remain private, but most people don't. So you should both request that yours remains private, and then you should ask for everybody else's. It is a great source of customer data. Because they ask questions in those RFPs like, what's your annual revenue, what's your,
I will provide the caveat to that, though. If you're going to FOIA it, there are institutions and organizations that will not be happy because it involves a lot of work. They have to print copies, and so there are third parties that you can go through
that make the
to
Freedom
do
of
the
Information
FOIA
request.
that just do that, and then
Yeah.
your name is, it's not your company making the FOIA request.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Great question. Other questions? Anybody have a question that brought you here? And yeah, Dan.
Curious about your thoughts. You talked before about the killer product that would kill the deal. Amazon Prime Video, they didn't change their pricing, but now they're including ads, and it was once an ad-free platform. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, essentially what they have done is now stolen a little bit of your attention, because they're going to force you to go through, like especially like they have the freebie thing, right? That's ad supported, and so I think you still kind of have a choice about which programs you want to watch. But I think overall, I would think that would have a detrimental effect on satisfaction. I know for me, it's not big enough that I don't still want to watch movies, but if they push it, like a lot of channels right now feel a lot like TV used to feel, and there's a reason why we all cut the cord, right? It's like, oh yeah, no ads. So I think we're probably marching toward some similar, evolution in programming. We'll see. Good question though. Yeah.
How do you apply a lot of this logic to outsourced services versus a product like a SaaS product or software?
Yeah. So my business is a fractional CMO business, right? I ran a Van Westendorp survey before I launched. And it gave me a lot of useful information about where I should price my services. I think also, in addition to just pure willingness to pay, like those early surveys can tell you about features that people value, and they can tell you, so sometimes you're asking the question wrong. Like this example that I gave with the RevRoad company, there was a lot of really great information by slicing and dicing the data that they gave us, but probably the biggest learning was the pricing approach that we took is probably not the right one. It probably isn't a match for their customer. And so all of those things you can learn from those early surveys. I mean, I'm a fan of quick and dirty surveys early and often. But also with surveys with services, part of that is productizing the offering. Right? People buy services, I'm going to hire an expert and I'm going to get that expert's time for a certain rate. A lot of consulting is done on an hourly basis, but it doesn't have to be. You can say, hey, look, I'm going to get you off the ground with X from here to X to Y, and I'm going to bundle that, or I'm going to call that a product and give it a price. And that model might be easier to understand for the customer than just a pure consulting model. So, there's probably a lot of more questions we could ask about that, but there's a lot of this I think applies directly. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on the importance of making sure when you're doing those surveys, making sure that you're actually surveying your ICP, and or that they're in a certain phase of the funnel? Does it matter what phase they're in? Is their input as valuable if they're early consideration phase?
I think so. I mean, part of the funnel and pipeline, like the further people go through the funnel and the pipeline, they're kind of expressing their interest level is higher. So some of that is kind of self-resolving, but like you would expect if you polled people who had very little familiarity with your company, that their willingness to pay would be lower. And it's not uncommon too, if, like let's say we want to do a product launch, and so we can't really poll our existing customers because there aren't any yet. So oftentimes those surveys need an explanation of the product and what the kind of the USP, what the value prop is up front, in order for people to have any semblance of how they might answer the questions. I do think too that consistency of data, you'll see more consistency the more appropriate the matches with the ICP. They'll be more consistent. Yeah.
So with products, like a product portfolio that's related, other than the example you showed of the sandwich with the diamond necklace.
Yeah.
Is a rule of thumb that mixed bundling is usually the best for revenue, like maximizing revenue?
Well, I think that what I'm trying to communicate is that you should at least have it as under consideration. It's like, okay, I know that it's an option to price individually, to price in bundles, and to do mixed bundling. And so it ultimately will come down to the willingness to pay. It may be the willingness to pay, it doesn't diverge very much. And so, and there are things that you would add on top of that research. But I guess my point would be, you should be thinking about it. And what would that look like? How would we bundle? How would we do mixed bundling? Is it appropriate to our product? Is it appropriate to our customer? Et cetera.
When you do that survey, are you doing that survey and asking the people responding to tell you their price? Or are you putting some prices out there and having them respond to them?
Yeah, so I have done both. And I think where it matters is if you think you'll get a lot of really wild cards. So let's say that the only pricing that I'm actually willing to consider, because it's the only place I can make money, or the way my margins are structured, whatever, the unit economics, then maybe what I want to do is give them a slider. But the thing is, it's anytime you introduce that, you're leading them.
Yeah.
So you're kind of violating a survey principle. But it still may give you better information. You may get people who will respond, it's like, well, actually I would have gone lower, but okay, I'm just going to go at the end, or higher. And so you want to give yourself plenty of slush, but it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
Curious about the surveying process. Do you feel, or in your experience, is it more beneficial, or are there additional benefits versus sending out just a written email survey or having a face-to-face conversation?
Oh yes. Like the face-to-face conversation is way more valuable. But it's also difficult. It's difficult to have 200 face-to-face conversations. Right? So the bar is high. Some places where I really, I'm afraid to move ahead without a face-to-face conversation is if messaging questions. I want to have enough face-to-face conversations that I have the voice of the customer ringing in my ear. So an advantage of surveys is they're quick and easy. But if it's like a core thing you're trying to validate for your business, then the face-to-face conversation is more valuable. Yeah. Yes?
So it sounds like possibly the best option is to throw the biggest in it, basically. So have the different options that I mentioned, higher price points that will capture the people that want a premium product, or to feel like it's a premium product. But in actuality, it's not much different than the base product. Minus a few features to justify that, or genuine value if you were to put the word in genuine value.
Yeah.
Are there any obvious products, industries, services that you would say don't try to capture as much as you can?
Yeah, so let me address that in a couple ways. You're asking about if we're trying to discover the unknown, should we cast as big a net as we can, and do we want to try to capture the most number of customers, right?
Let's say you already know, let's say you know that there's a market, or that there's customers that will pay $2,000. There's also customers that will pay no more than $300. Are there industries where you shouldn't even try to capture both of those? Or scenarios?
Yeah, so let me restate to make sure I get this right. Let's say that you're learning that there are customers who have a willingness to pay that's high, like the 2,000, and there are also customers who have a willingness to pay that is low. I think, that you have learned that is really valuable in terms of what decisions you're going to make with your business. Because now you can decide, it's like, well, maybe there's a smaller universe of customers high, and I don't care about serving the low customers because this is my best path to revenue. Or maybe there's not very many of the people who are willing to pay high, and I want to ignore them. Or I want to do both. If I do both, now I have to consider how my pitch to these people relates. It doesn't have to even be a different product, by the way. Sometimes it can be a different geography. Like textbooks is an example of this, where textbooks sold in Asia are oftentimes sold much cheaper than they are in the United States. And the reason for that is that all of all the cogs that go into producing the United States version, those are already sunk costs. And so when companies take them to Asia, it's only the marginal cost. It's only the actual cost of the paper. That's as much as they need to increase their revenue. So there could be a reason where just in different markets you approach that. If it's the same market, then you have to reckon with what it's going to be like for customers to look at both of these and say, okay, either something's wrong with the product I'm getting for 300, or those people who are paying 2,000 are out to lunch. So you have to kind of reckon with how people will think about that. And I think my goal here, and also if you go through like the ebook that I offer for download, my goal is just take a look through that, and your conversations and your thinking about pricing will be more comprehensive. You'll understand sort of more about what the options are. And then it's really, you have tools in your tool belt to approach how's pricing working for my particular company and my particular sort of product customer mix. Thank you. Was there a question over here? Yeah.
So I know like some websites for SaaS, they're just like, if you have this many people, it's this much. If you're enterprise, just give us a call. Is that similar to the aspect of like face-to-face is better and then you just learn more? Or what's the reason?
Yeah, I mean, if you're selling a product like that, why would you want the enterprise to call? It probably has to do with the fact that you're willing to land that big client, you're willing to make concessions that you don't want to publicize. That may not be the only reason, but that's a big one. It's like, okay, I'm going to have volume discounts, or I may have multi-year pricing discounts depending on the size of the contract, because this contract is going to be worth a lot more to us. And I don't want to publish those because I don't want that to confuse my self-service business. Essentially, like if I have a product-led, I have a product-led on one side and a sales-led team on the other, and I need those to function kind of separately, but I also don't want to build two different websites and be more confusing. So that's how I'd say people are thinking about that most of the time. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure to talk through pricing with you guys. I'll be hanging around for a little bit if you have questions that we didn't answer in front of the group. But really appreciate you coming, and enjoy the rest of Utah Tech Week.